In today's video, we are going to talk about blending and blend options. If you're new to Affinity, blending might sound a bit abstract at first, but once you understand what it actually does, it becomes one of the most powerful tools in your workflow. I'll start by explaining what blending really means, and then we'll break down to the blend options step by step so you know exactly when and why to use them. So first, let's clarify what blending actually means. In Affinity or any other photo editing software with layers, blending describes how the pixels of one layer are combined with the pixels of the layers beneath. Every layer you add sits on top of another layer, and blending is simply the math Affinity uses to decide how those pixels interact. By default, a layer just covers what's below based on opacity. But once you start using blend modes and blend options, you're no longer just stacking layers. You're telling Affinity how colors, brightness, and contrast should mix together. This is why blending is such a core concept. It doesn't change where things are in your image, it changes how they visually interact. And once you understand that, blend modes and blend ranges start to make a lot more sense. So blending really answers three key questions. Which pixels interact? How are their values combined? And how smoothly does that transaction happen? Blend modes answer the second question. They define how pixel values are combined. That's where modes like multiply, screen, and overlay come into play. Blend ranges answer the first question. They let you control which pixels are actually allowed to interact based on brightness. And finally, settings like gamma and anti-aliasing don't change what blends or how it blends, but they affect how the math behind the blending is applied, which directly influences how natural or harsh the results look. Once you see blending this way, all these tools stop feeling separate and start working together as one system. Let's start with blend modes, because this is usually where people first encounter blending in Affinity. Blend modes define the formula how pixel values are combined with the layers underneath. Modes like multiply, screen, overlay, and soft light don't decide where the effect happens. They only define the mathematical relationship between the colors and the brightness values. Going through every blend mode would deserve its own video, and I have already covered that in detail. So if you want a full breakdown of what each blend mode does and when to use it, make sure to check out that video. I'll put a link in the description for you. For this video, we'll assume you are familiar with the idea of blend modes and we'll focus on what most people miss, the blend options, which give you far more control over how and where those blend modes are applied. Now that we understand what blend modes do, the next step is to control where that blending actually happens. And for that, we need the blend options. With a layer selected, go to the Layers panel and click on the small gear icon next to the blend mode. This opens up the blend options dialog, and this is where Affinity gives you precise control over how the blending is calculated. At first glance, this panel can look a bit intimidating, but once you break it down, it's actually very logical. We'll start at the top with the global blending settings and then move down to the blend ranges themselves. Let's walk through this dialog from top to bottom because the order here actually matters. Everything at the top affects how blending is calculated globally for this layer, while the controls at the bottom decide which tonal values are allowed to blend. So even before touching the blend ranges, these top settings already influence the final result. At the very top, we start with blend gamma. This setting defines the color space used for blending calculations. By default, it's set to 2.2, which matches the standard display gamma for sRGB and gives the most natural looking results for photo work. Changing this doesn't affect the image very much, it changes the color mask slightly, usually affecting the midtones. You can change the gamma value from 1, which is a linear RGB color space, to 3. Keep in mind that the default gamma for text layers is 1.45, which can be changed in the settings if you prefer a different default gamma for text. Next to the gamma, we have the coverage map. This is sometimes referred as to the anti-aliasing ramp or the anti-aliasing coverage. This controls how anti-aliasing is being applied by adjusting the curve, and we can even completely turn off the anti-aliasing. For most workflows, the default linear behavior is exactly what you want. Related to the coverage map, we have the anti-aliasing drop-down box. If you keep this to inherit, the anti-aliasing setting from the parent layer will be used. You can override this by either setting it to force on, which will always use anti-aliasing, or use force off, which will never use anti-aliasing. In most cases, you'll want to leave this setting to inherit. After that, we have the fill opacity. This works differently from the normal layer opacity. Fill opacity affects the blending math itself and has an effect on the special blend modes like overlay and linear light. Lowering this fill opacity can soften the effect without changing how transparent the layer looks overall. I'll put a link in the description about the video explaining the fill opacity and the special blend modes if you want to know more about that. Changing the fill opacity for regular blend modes acts like a regular opacity of a layer. The regular opacity will also affect the layer effects, whereas the fill opacity will only act on the layer content itself. Now that we have the global settings out of our way, we reach the heart of the dialog, the blend ranges. This is where we control which brightness values of the layer or the layers underneath are allowed to interact. The first one is the source layer ranges. This controls which brightness values of the current layer are allowed to remain visible. On the left side you have the shadows of the layer and on the right side the highlights. When you drag these handles inward, you're telling Affinity to hide parts of this layer based on its own brightness. For example, if you lower the left handle and move it inwards, the darker parts of the layer start to fade out. This can be useful when a layer contains unwanted dark or bright areas and you only want to keep a specific tonal range from that layer. Next on the right is the underlaying composition ranges. This time, instead of looking at the layer itself, it looks at the brightness of everything underneath the layer. This, for example, allows you to say, only show this layer where the image below is dark or only where it is bright. For example, you can add grain or texture and then remove it from the highlights underneath. Or apply a glow effect that only appears in the bright areas without washing out the shadows. You can also add points to the curves allowing for more custom control. For example, like now, we filter out the midtones from the target. Optionally, you have the option to turn off the linear checkbox, which allows for a more custom curve. The in and out text boxes show the position of the selected node, and for precise control you can add the exact percentage if needed. Before we wrap up, there's one more important control in this dialog that often gets overlooked, and that's the channels option. By default, blend ranges are applied based on luminance, meaning Affinity looks at the overall brightness of the layer or the underlying image. But you're not limited to that. Using the channels dropdown, you can tell Affinity to calculate blend ranges based on a specific color channel instead. Instead of blending based on overall brightness, you could base the blend on just the red, green or blue channel. Once you select a channel, the blend range graph updates to reflect the channel values, and your handles now control blending based on the channel's intensity instead of luminance. This way, you can either include or exclude color channel ranges. You might think that this could, for example, be used for a green screen mask. However, this does not work very well, as black, white and gray values will always contain the same amount of color from each channel. So by excluding a color channel, you will always exclude the black, white or grays, which at the end results in something that you're not looking for. To wrap up, blend modes decide how pixels are combined, blend ranges decide which pixels are allowed to interact, and especially using blend ranges, we can create interesting blends that look amazing. If you found this helpful, give the video a like, and if you want to go deeper in Affinity's more advanced tools, make sure you're subscribed. In the next video, which will be a part of the masking tutorial series, we'll build on this by combining blend ranges with the erase blend mode to create masks. Thanks for tuning in and see you in the next video.